Welcome to First Class Counselors, where we give camp counselors insider tips and advice on how to make a camper's summer the best it can be.
And no matter what generation of camp staff you are, or even if you're brand new to the camp world, we want to foster a mindset of growth and self development because we know that that's what's going to make a great cabin counselor, or dare we say it, a first class counselor. And that's why we do what we do here on First Class Counselors to empower counselors to be the best they can be, to give the campers the best experience that they deserve.
My name is Oliver Cregan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the director of camping services at YMCA Camp Westwood with the Pawtucket YMCA in Coventry, Rhode Island. We are a rebuilding day camp that plans to introduce overnight camp again in 2025.
And my name's Matt Wilford. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the executive producer of podcasting and a consultant with Go Camp Pro.
So today's topic, a new age of campers has taken over. They are known as Gen Alpha, and they are pretty much making up every single one of your campers. Matt's going to break down what years they were born in just a minute, but these campers have grown up in an age of technology, an age of social justice, and an age without Saturday morning cartoons, which is detrimental to your development, if you ask me. If you did not grow up watching Saturday morning cartoons, like, come on, you missed out on some really important life lessons. But what makes them different? What makes them tick? Dare I say TikTok? But most importantly,
Ooh.
how are we going to be first class counselors for them? So, Matt, give me the details. Who are these kids at camp? What's their generation?
Okay, I'm gonna derail us here. When you said Saturday morning cartoons, what cartoon came to mind right away for you? This will just age us right at the start.
Okay. First off, is I always think this is a weird one, but I was a huge fan of Jackie Chan Adventures. So
Oh,
I know, really off the cuff there, but I really enjoyed it. I was also Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Those were big ones for me as well. And I will say the greatest cartoon ever created, just one of the best written, one of the best style is Avatar, right? Like
oh,
it,
okay, yep,
I think hands down, as far as a creation, it is a beautiful form of art, a beautiful form of storytelling. It hits on so many different arcs, character development. If you really get down to like the nitty and gritty, it is different than other Saturday morning cartoons.
mm,
I think it's just phenomenal. Also,
cool.
Dragon Ball Z. You know, you got to Kamehameha or
Yeah,
whatever it's called.
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah. Don't pretend like you don't know. Yeah, for sure. For me, I think I hit Looney Tunes like late. Like Looney Tunes have been out for a while when I started watching it. So like Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote. For me, that was like true Saturday morning cartoons. But I hit Pokemon as well. But for me, it is Recess. I don't know if that was a big show in the States, but Recess for me was like I could watch both episodes of Recess and then one half of the Weekenders before I had to like sprint down the street to get my bus. And I will say I've started rewatching Recess, and it is amazing. Highly recommend it. And I also watched Shrek, the first Shrek movie. I know this has like nothing to do with it. This is a huge non sequitur, but go back and watch the first Shrek movie, people. It is full of like full on laugh out loud moments. Primo millennial stuff there.
a moment for millennials though is right now you can definitely tell. Like I grew up like a CW kid, and Matt, you definitely grew up as like a Cartoon Network kid because not only do you have like your favorite cartoons and stuff, but you have like the networks that were just dominant in your life, right? Like you have Cartoon Network kids, you have CW kids, you
Yeah.
have like PBS kids. They're their own breed, but like but that's like another way to like break down millennials. Is like, what was your Saturday morning cartoon channel to
Totally.
go to? And like you
Yeah,
could
yeah, yeah.
click around, but you had one. So like I
Hmm.
know a little bit more about Matt now because I know he grew up on that Cartoon Network grind. Probably did some Johnny Bravo. That's why his hair is coiffed the way it is. You know.
I did watch Johnny Bravo a little bit. That show is very problematic when you go back to it now.
Oh
Anyway,
yes.
Generation Alpha. So Gen Alpha will not. If they're watching these cartoons, they're watching them on a streaming service. They were born 2010 to 2024. So the oldest Gen Alphas right now, just to put this into context that everyone can understand, are 14 years old, right? So they're the 14-year-olds. I think that math is right, right? They're coming to camp, they're 14. That's Gen Alpha. And to give you kind of a little bit more context, 2010 was the year that the iPad was first introduced. So for reference, the iPad 2010, when I was 20 years old, the iPad was first introduced. So, this generation is most notably impacted by two things. One, the global pandemic. Some of them won't know a world before the COVID-19 pandemic, and they are also the most digitally immersed generation, and they are going to fully grow up with the influence of AI being a thing. For most of them, for the ones that aren't like 14, for the ones that are, born in 2010, and or born later than that, they're going to go through school with AI, which is a whole nother podcast. I've been listening to podcasts about education and AI, and it's wild out there. This is a new generation, and we need to be ready for them at camp. So in this episode, we're going to talk about just some more key identifiers of Gen Alpha. We'll talk about what the relationship, how Gen Alpha is different than the other generations and kind of what that means. And then finally, of course, how this all applies to the camp experience. We'll touch on that throughout, but at the end, we'll really hammer it home and how do counselors need to be ready for Gen Alpha. There's a lot of conversations going on in the industry about how camp directors need to be ready for Gen Alpha, but we really want to narrow down on what you as counselors need to know about this group of campers. And I'm sure this will not be the last episode where we talk about this, but let's get started. Key indicators, Gen Alpha, Oliver, what are we seeing with this generation?
Yeah, I think you're going to hear us repeat a lot of those things that you just talked about, at least as the formative stuff for Gen Alpha, right? And the big one you're going to hear, and you probably have heard a bunch of times, it's tech, 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 right? And it's conference season coming up for us camp professionals. And if there's not sessions on Gen Alpha, I can guarantee you next year there's going to be some. Matt and I just might be a little ahead of the curve. But the first one is tech, 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 right? We know that this generation is growing up with technology and what that can do for them. And, Matt, I'll dive into a little bit, but I want to get some of the other things out of the way too. So the next thing is we know that they have a shortened attention span. We know that most are testing with an attention span between 4 to 7 seconds, which is actually faster than our their predecessors, Gen Z, who are coming in around 11 seconds of an attention span. So you can already see two generations have a significantly shortened attention span. And millennials, I think, we're coming in around like 17 or like 20 something seconds, where, and it's just exponentially getting smaller and smaller every generation. So that's important to think about. How long can you hold attention for, right? The next thing is streamlined. This is huge for them. Convenience conquers all. If I can order it on Amazon, if I can look it up on Google, this is what is most important. They don't watch Saturday morning cartoons. They just watch cartoons. It's on Netflix. It's streamed. There's a big controversy for big sports people out there. Like the NFL just did a football game where like people pay to watch it on regular cable television, but they said this playoff game is only going to be available on stream. So if people wanted to watch it, they had to pay an additional $6. And the reason why this is happening is because they know that people are going to be moving to streaming, and that's going to be happening with those younger generations. So it might be frustrating for us older millennials. We're like, I don't want to pay $5 for this. But for someone who is Gen Alpha or maybe even Gen Z, a little bit older, but buying TV, it's not an issue for them. They're already streaming. The day is gone.
Well,
And
it's also the fact that like time, when you think about it, time is not a like qualifier on something. There's no Saturday morning, like you said, Saturday morning cartoons doesn't matter. They're just cartoons now, and I think it's important to emphasize that time does not mean what it once did. So things like patience, things like the attention span, it totally makes sense. If I can get the answer and the information, I think about it like, when we got when you started in math class, when calculators, we're not that old folks out there that we
the
didn't
TI
start with
84.
calculators. Yeah. But like, there's always the argument like, well, why do I need to know my times tables if I have a calculator? I think that this generation, they are also had smart speakers that are in their lives from birth. literally from birth. Like smart speakers have been out for a while, but now they're answering questions and AI. You don't need to wait for anything. So any scene of like time being a limiting factor is a huge inconvenience that'll just frustrate this generation.
You think about it this way: when you were growing up, even Gen Z, if you needed to ask a question, yeah, sometimes you might Google it on a phone or on a laptop or something like that, or you would shout to mom and dad, "Hey, how far away is New York from us?" And mom and dad would be like, "Yeah, 3 hours or whatever,
Right.
whatever the distance was." But now parents are sitting in their house, and all of a sudden their kid just randomly goes, "Hey Google, hey Alexa, how far is my phone just went off? How far is New York?" And then Alexa answers, not mom, not dad, not the adult in the house who has the knowledge to do it, but the uh, but the Google or the Alexa smart device that's in the house. So think about that change too
Mm,
of that, and we'll talk about relations in a little bit, but that change of relationship of parental leadership figure in their life and their access to information. And that's a huge thing. The next one is implicit assumption, right? Because they have access to so many answers so quickly, um, they generally accept that everyone's getting the same answer, right? So if they search something, the top or the one page on Google that shows up, that's everyone. Everyone is searching Google, and that first page on Google is the official answer that most people are getting. So that implicit assumption is really important. But Matt's going to touch on this, which is really important, is that we are in front of one of the most diverse generations of our lifetime. So you have these incredibly unique people who believe in everyone being an individual, but the answer they are getting when they go into their research is typically the same. This is probably going to be a big challenge for them moving forward of how do they keep that uniqueness, how do they keep that individuality, but how do they also take on the information they're doing, because this is also the generation that is going to be faced with some of the largest amounts of misinformation on the internet ever, right? um, Whatever your political bias is, there, we have an election year coming up. 2024 is one of the largest election years across the world. So it's not just the United States, and it's not just several other countries, but there are the most democratic elections happening in the world this year. And the biggest fear going into them by political correspondents is the information getting out there true to people?
right.
And that's huge. And how do you prove it's true? There's so many ways to sneakily put things on the internet that aren't true, or you know something that's not correct. And that's how we just talked about it. This generation is getting their answers. They're going to the internet. So control over that information is going to be a huge thing when it comes to their growth and their understanding of the world that's going on. The next thing is entertainment and stimulation is provided, it's not created. So if they need to be entertained for an hour or two, they pick up their phone, they get
Right.
to watch TikTok videos. There is no boredom. There is no time period which they cannot be stimulated, right? As long as they have a decent internet connection to their phone, their brain can get the dopamine hit that they want or the serotonin that they want in order to feel entertained. So that's hugely different. Think about it when maybe if you're Gen Z, it might be a little bit tougher, but for us millennials or and older, there were points in time that you were bored. You needed to find a way to entertain yourself. And that meant walking around the house to find a book. That meant waiting for your Saturday morning cartoon to come on. It meant going outside and throwing rocks at a tree until, I don't know, you hit the center of the tree the right way, right? This feeling of absentness is not going to be true for this generation. Or it's not going to be as common for them. So that's important as well. The next thing is they are slow growers, much like Gen Z and millennials have had. Life is starting later, so this means like our mile markers in life, their first job, when they learn to drive a car, even their first drink, even like troublesome behavior. These things are all happening later in life. They're delaying it, right? However, they are also becoming more mature quicker. They have access to information, so because of that, they can have more articulate conversations and they can make more decisions. And I'll talk about the decision making that this generation is capable of later on in the show. But I think that's really important for us to understand that that they're not at a lack of information. They're just at a lack of experience, which is a big thing that we're going to talk. I think talking about is important. And then we've talked about COVID already. So we know that by our general measurement, by standard of education, this generation is pretty behind. Most estimates say that they're about 18 months or 12 to 18 months behind where kids at the same age were at their time. However, we know that this generation is consuming information faster, right? So it may not be the expected learning that we think of their algebra or their calculus or this specific English curriculum that we have. They might not be ahead or matching what previous generations did in those categories, but their overall intake of information is much, much, much higher than previous generations because they have so much. And then lastly is they still do, like Generation Z, have an implicit safety and cautiousness to them, right? They believe like things should generally be safe. They should not have to worry about their well-being. They're not going to take as many large risks for themselves in like a physical kind of putting themselves out there. However, this generation has also learned that taking risks in other categories is sometimes a good thing. So much like Generation Z, they are willing to, take a risk with where they may put their money, right? That they believe in assets and putting investments in, and hopefully seeing that grow. So that's a pretty cool thing. They have a lot of deciding factors in our economy, and we'll talk about that hopefully later. But that's just some key identifiers for some of the things that you're going to have to look for when you're working with with Gen Alpha this summer in your campers. So, Matt, what do you think of some of those things that I was able to find, kind of defining what Gen Alpha is?
I think a lot of these are bang on, and we'll put some links to some of our research in the show notes so that you can double check us. We don't want to be a source of misinformation, certainly, but I'll just touch on a couple more things. I think knowing so Gen Alpha is being raised primarily by millennials. It's not exclusively millennials, but so thinking about what their household influence is, because I think that millennials are me being a millennial, we have an interesting relationship with technology because we grew up without the smartphone, whereas Gen Z mostly grew up with a smartphone, right? So I think millennials, we weren't fully immersed in it, so I think we have a little bit of you know a helpful boundary setting. I think that this is an overgeneralization for sure, but I think thinking of their households, Gen Alpha is going to be on a really big spectrum on their relationship with technology too. Some will be very dependent, but I have friends with kids that are very strict with technology use at their households, and that they're not using smart speakers, they're not using screens until the kids are 2 years old. But some I know are using them right away, and there's a huge debate on that. I'm not saying either is right or wrong, but knowing that the kids coming to camp, it's important that we don't just assume that they all know everything about technology and are going to bring a phone or whatever, because that's not necessarily true for this generation. Now, what I noticed at camp was that the internet that they are exposed to is a largely unregulated one, with no real like checks and balances and a lot of easy ways to get around it. Like, yeah, there's YouTube Kids and stuff like that, but man, oh man, the 6 year olds that were at camp this past summer knew a lot more than I knew as a 6 year old, and were saying some things that I did not say until I was probably a 20-year old in some cases. So it was wild that their knowledge is just really advanced. But that's also a good thing in a lot of ways. We'll get into that. But they just because information is truly at their fingertips, like no other generation, and their choice in what to explore is also abundant and instant. Now, they might not explore those things in the right direction, and again, we'll get into that as we go on, and our job is to like help them understand what misinformation is, or that they do have internal bias and those types of things, because they're not viewing this advanced content with an advanced like frontal lobe in their brain that has like processing and reasoning and understanding. So they're being influenced by things, and that's why we're seeing like the toxic influence of Andrew Tate and misogynists and all of that kind of stuff become a real problem with kids, because they don't have that discerning factor. Some adults don't either, but kids especially don't have that like developed brain to be able to root out what is right and what is wrong. And then we can't overstate it enough that the pandemic was just in core developmental time for them. Many, especially social developmental setups. So they're coming to camp. I don't know about you, Oliver, but there was something in the water in these past couple summers with kids at camp of just not knowing how to socialize, and some might say that it presented as like a lack of empathy, but I think it was just a general ignorance sometimes of social cues and what was right and what was wrong for what we would know that. So there was a lot of coaching that needed to happen this summer. And then the last one, I think it's really important to notice that they're living in an especially fraught time with a lot of existential crisis right now. Um, Climate and economic anxiety, I think we haven't seen that combined with multiple wars going on in the world. I think there's a lot going on for this generation that they again are being exposed to like not many other generations. Certainly, we're not living in a world war right now, but and we're not living in the Great Depression and those kinds of things. But between the pandemic, the climate, and where the economy is right now, it is really a big old stew of yuck that that Gen Alpha is like coming to terms with understanding that they have 70 years that they're going to be existing in this. So there's a lot that will happen with that. So a lot that we need to be ready for.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that relationship that Gen A, or how Gen A is approaching relationships. And I think I'm going to hit some things that we talked about before. And really where I want to push our conversation is a little, you talked about kind of COVID and social. And this is one of the things that I personally have seen standing out with my own family. And that is a stronger family relationship that's formed due to COVID, right?
Mm,
For a long period of time, these younger kids were directly only with mom, dad, right? Their close family unit, right? That didn't
totally.
really break away, which is really kind of strange because if you think about it, this is a little bit similar to what it was a long, long time ago, where like families were a more integrated unit. But we're really looking at a nuclear family, not so much of the family in the extended. So if we go back towards history, I love drawing back a little bit of what I actually studied in college. But if we look back at our family units pre World War II, the family unit was extended family all under essentially one roof. We were sticking about as many cousins, aunts, uncles, grandma, grandpa in one house as possible. Now, post World War II, we went to a nuclear family unit in most cases, right? I'm generalizing this change in our sociological look in the Western area here in the United States.
Hmm.
And it has changed a bit since then, but there's still that core desire, I think, for that nuclear family. And when COVID hit, it was your nuclear family. It was, your parent and guardian, your children. And that was really it in a lot of cases. So they became really, really close. This strong family relationship, right? And the parent's ability to kind of be constantly watchful and wary about their child really creates this relationship of parents guarding their children, right? Um, whether it's from germs, right? Because now we have this front of this idea that another pandemic can spur our at any moment. So we always need to be on the guard for this, right? Which has created a world where that's a concern, right?
Yeah.
And parents are worried about their children's safety at a microscopic level. Think about that. That's how parents used to be.
Yeah. Literally
Come
microscopic.
back when the light turns, like when the lights turn on in the street. That's when you have to be back at the house.
Right.
You know, now it's microscopic view of how their kids are being cared for. That is, like we've talked about, snowplow, helicopter parents, all these different things. We're now looking at like microscope parents. I'll coin
Yeah.
that term now.
Yeah.
Get a
Well,
little cred.
and I think too, think about how that translates to how kids are feeling, right? That if we're talking about the kids in our cabin, those are the ones they are depending on how their parents raise them, that's going to be the effect that they have. So if parents are extremely meticulous and risk averse when it comes to germs or anything like that, that is going to most likely be what presents at camp. So keep that in mind as we go through all these things. How is this going to affect the kids? Because you're right, Oliver, that a parent who is, I have met parents who are out there through the pandemic who had a baby, like, oh, when we all thought that like you had to go home and wash your groceries. Can you imagine like getting those like messages as a developing infant that the world was out to get you? Man, oh man. And if that's how your parents reacted, no fault to them. So but yeah, that is certainly going to have an effect on how they view risk and germs and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you can't neglect a parent's care for their child. And I think, and that's going back to a little bit of what we said before. This generation of kids, this Gen Alpha, their resource of information is the internet, right? Like they don't need to go to mom and dad for that information anymore. But, but the internet does not protect them, right? The protector, the one who keeps them safe, is mom and dad now. And that's the only relationship that they've formed. So for them, mom and dad are my safety net. They are the ones who are going to keep me safe. What they say safety wise is code. And because of that, they keep me away from all this dangerous stuff that's happening in the world because we became this strong nuclear unit during COVID, right?
Hmm.
Now the parents are going to send them to you at camp, and the parent has to put the trust in somebody else to now take that over. But now this child who has only seen mom and dad, or was forced to see mom and dad as their protector during this dangerous time, now has to have someone new step in and become their protector and safe caregiver. And that's a challenge
Yeah.
because what they've always known is mom and dad being that safety net. So just know when it comes to safety, right? This is an expectation of these kids that you as a counselor are going to have to uphold. That's a
Yeah.
huge thing, huge thing.
Okay,
But I have a
wait,
lot of
wait.
points here.
Hold on. I need to unravel this thread a little bit more, Oliver, because when
Okay.
we're talking about relationships and we're talking about like technology and parents, we cannot discredit or discount the effect that AI is going to have on these kids as well. There are already, I can't remember the website, but Travis Allison, who hosts the Camp Hacker podcast, showed me a website that is full of AI chatbots that are acting as kids' friends. And it literally there's a slate where you can pick where it's like, oh, I want the jock to be my friend, and it's going to react like that. I want Deadpool to be my friend, and it's going to talk to me like that. And I think that the variety there is cool, and I think there's a lot that can be learned there. But what we need to be aware of is that some kids' friends are chatbots. And what a chatbot is by and large, at least where AI is right now, it is predictable. It has measured controls on it that a chatbot will, unless you ask it to, or unless a kid consents to that chatbot, a chatbot's not going to be mean to them. It's going to be predictable. It's going to act like it wants. You're going to have a lot of control over that as well. And then when they get to camp, they're going to have none of that. They're going to look at this other kid who's going to say something mean to them, and their brain is going to explode because they have not had the ability. Yeah, maybe in school they'll have that, but I think we can't discount the fact that the predictability of relationships at camp is they are not predictable. And you're right, they're being taken away from, hopefully, that their parents, no matter what that parental structure is at home, they're being taken away from that. Again, another predictable relationship, like you said, Oliver. They hopefully are the safety net for that kiddo, and then they're being taken away from technology that includes some of those predictable relationships, and they cannot escape from that. And that is wild to think about. And it means that we need to completely change the way that we, not completely change, but we need to double down on the coaching and the processing that we do when it comes to helping kids build those friendships and relationships, and be way more patient than we've ever been. This is not going to be the generation where we can be like, okay, shake hands and deal with it, because they're not going to be able to get over conflict like that.
Yeah. Do you think that like AI is just going to replace like the imaginary friend?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me consult my imaginary friend that I had growing up. I don't know. I honestly, but I think I think in terms of immediacy, I think yes, because I think that if you want to like role play that other relationship that's not a real person, this is the perfect. And you have a phone, you have the or whatever the ability to do that. I think you have that. I think that's available to you, and your imaginary friend talks back to you now.
And on the note of growing up later in life, like of markers, right? Your typical imaginary friend would fade around what, 6, 7. But
Right.
now with AI, if it's replacing the imaginary friend, there's no reason to think that that AI couldn't stay as a friend because it's an actual relationship, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
AI can be carried around in your pocket. It's just
It's a
things to
one.
think
It's a one. Yeah, and you or you think it's a relationship too. That's different. I
about.
mean, let's not get into the definition of relationship, but I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it gets wild when you think about even like the development of like sexual relationships and healthy, like a healthy relationship towards like sexuality and consent and those kinds of things. Because again, the internet is a bit of a dumpster fire when it comes to this, and regulations just aren't moving as fast as technology developments are. So
Yeah.
kids are coming in with this like sense of even false sense
Well,
of maturity.
I mean, if you think about it on the line of consent, right? The user, whether it's child or adult or whoever, forms whatever consent rules that that AI has to follow, right? Which
Exactly.
means that
Yeah.
they're never actually giving the AI is never giving consent, nor is the child ever asking for it. They know what the consent rule is going to be, and they can play to that, and they can change what they want the consent to be. So now, if I take that and I address it in real life, I can't control what somebody else's consent is going to be back to
Right.
me.
And
So
that's good.
that
That's going to be hard. That's going to be scary and
right.
frustrating.
So that what happens when like a child is used to talking to an AI, or they're used to getting what they want from their computer friend or their online relationship, and now they have to go out into the real world where they can't manipulate those relationships to how they want. So
Right.
that's an important thing. Sorry, a little bit on a tangent there, but it's important to understand what seems like a small thing can have a very large effect down the road. And we see these in every generation, in every form. Right now, we're at a point where we just try to predict what could possibly happen. So
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
me get more into that relationships and some of the factors that choose and decide it. So one thing to note is Gen Alpha is the largest generation on the planet right now. Where we love making babies, but we had a big population, and our birth rate was still is at a positive, right? But our birth rate is also decreasing. So Gen Alpha may not be the top of this bell curve, I guess is the best way to say it. They may not be the biggest generation. The next generation may be bigger than them, but we know that it's starting to cap, or at least we believe population wise it's starting to cap, that we're not going to keep exponentially growing as a population. So it's powerful to note that that number of people comes with an amount of power to it, whether it's spending power, whether it's voting power, it's decision making. And we've talked about this before on the show. But we know what the internet did for Gen Z, and how just being a voice on the internet when it came to election time or social movement, they had access to the internet. The Gen Z had power of voice, and they were also a large generation. They were able to make significant impacts despite not having voting power in the 2020 election here in the United States. Which were maybe indicative to how that election went. So that's important to recognize that while Gen Alpha may still not have the right to vote coming up in future elections, for the next couple elections, they're still going to have the power of the internet behind them and the power of technology. So they have that ability to influence those things. So that's important,
Mhm.
just based off the size of their generation, right? And seeing that they might take over Gen Z for spending. Gen Z is right now the largest spending generation. They're the most spending power. They've started taking that over as they've entered the workplace. The next thing to understand is parenting styles have changed, right? So millennial generation, it's more of a cooperative parenting style. They are allowing their children to make decisions as they are growing up. This is mostly because tech has given their children the ability to get information and therefore make informed decisions. And millennial parents are typically, as a parenting style, working with their children so that they can grow and make decisions. It's not a more dogmatic style of parenting that millennials or boomers or older generations may have gotten. So that's really important to understand, because what it means is this generation is used to making decisions. They're not scared to make decisions. They've been trained on how to do it. They might be socially challenged to make decisions in group environments, but for their own personal wants, desires, and their path, that's a lot easier for them. So whatever direction they want to go, this generation alpha is going to be able to find their path, hopefully, is the belief, a lot faster, because they have the experiences coming at them and the information accessible to them to say, hey, I think this is what I prefer to do with my life, which is kind of a cool thing. We
Mhm.
might see them trying to input themselves into the world a lot faster. And Matt talked about how the internet is this unregulated dumpster fire. We've already seen Gen Z, especially younger Gen Z, and we'll probably start to see older Gen Alpha now start to do things like starting a business online, right? Because that's essentially unregulated. And if they want to do some type of third party selling of products with a, everybody who clicks this link, I get 2 pennies or whatever it might be, right? They're going to be starting those businesses to, take advantage of their access to the internet, but also their ability to make decisions and find an income source that works for them. So, and that comes from a parenting style that has changed, right? That ability to give them a little bit more independence in their decision making. Um, and they have a faster pace for change, right? We've seen this in every generation. Millennials, well, I mean, we can go all the way back to baby boomers, but social change, economic policy change, all of these things are changing faster because of each generation moves quicker. We have access to technology, we have stronger communication styles, we have this ability to learn information faster than anybody else. So we know that our pace is getting faster and faster. And because of that, we see more changing, and therefore we're more okay with changing. So that trained response for us is going to be, or for Gen Alpha, it's going to be really big, because the generation after them will probably be just as acceptable to change, right? And this fast moving culture we'll have is will continue to move quickly. The next couple of things, I'll quickly get through this. They're a lot more health conscious as a generation. Millennials kind of started learning that processed foods and things like that are not always the best for people. And we started changing our diet plans. Gen Z was also a huge advocate for this, but now we're starting to see healthier foods entering our environment, a desire for physical activity, but also a desire for a healthier environment. Matt's talked about how their climate change is a huge thing for Gen Alpha, that it's important for them in their decision making process and how they want the world to be. So this health conscious goes for food, physical activity, the environment, and also, as Matt mentioned before, mental health. They are one of the most mentally attuned generations. In fact, if you go to a school, it's very strange. I was with a teacher a few weeks ago in their classroom, and I was going to call him a camper, but a student came up to the teacher after having a conflict with another student, went up to the teacher and said, um, unfortunately, right now, me and so are not getting along. I'm going to take some private time to sit in the chill zone to collect myself, and then I will return back to my activity. That's literally like verbatim what the child said. It was wild to me.
That's cool.
Uh, but it was because their mental and emotional IQ, um, I don't want to say stronger, but it's affected at a different rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you might talk to an older generation and they might say, well, that kid needs grit and they need to learn how to problem solve with that other child and all this kind of stuff. And that's how an older generation may have felt they had to deal with it. But this generation is finding their own way and their own mental IQ to handle these situations.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I will say is that uh, written information has a strong, and it is going to be really important for us. It's not going to die. I don't think so. The way that we're going to be getting information out to this generation is through visual content, right? Like it is going to be like those TikTok videos or whatever it might be that is quick to the point, breaks down the information, is visually appealing for someone to watch. That is really how this generation is taking information. And you can see it by the way they talk to each other. It's like, I learned this on TikTok. Oh, I saw that on TikTok. This one video that I saw on Instagram. That's how the conversation is going. That's the social media, these media platforms that are quick videos. Even long form YouTube is still holding on pretty tight. But this is how information is getting passed to them. This is what's inspiring conversations, and this is what's inspiring their learning process, right? So you as a counselor, we'll get into it, but how can you use that media, that process for them so that they are having more fun at camp at a place that we typically say no technology, right? Keep that away. There, every camp has its policies on it, but most camps are pretty like, oh, let's cut down on the amount of screen time, you guys. So
Hmm.
those are a lot of the relationship things that I have seen, but also, I put a little bit of research in and found, and definitely kind of hold true. I'm using personal experience in it as well.
Yeah, those are really good, and I think I think about my one of my cousins who he would be a Gen Z, not a Gen Alpha, but he was telling me about how much money he's made in Bitcoin in the last 3 years. The guy's made $15,000 in Bitcoin, and he's like in his young like early 20s right now. When you said that people start businesses online, I think that like this generation, Gen Z included, but especially Gen Alpha, they're going to be thinking of pretty unconventional ways to do things, and that's like participate in the economy. They won't settle for like status quo, and where the economy is, where people are making just abysmal salaries based on how um, the cost of living being so high, that there's a breaking point that I think is certainly coming, that this generation will certainly be, if it hasn't happened yet, I think this is the generation for where there's going to be some real reevaluation of like, do we have to be doing things the way we've always done it? And it's certainly starting with millennials and Gen Z. Even look at the conversation around the 4-day work week. But I think that's only going to be something that we
Or
look a
working at
little closer
home
at.
and working in the
Yeah,
office, right? That's
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
so.
yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
it's a great point too, because if they're not going to make the income necessary, right? When does the number of jobs that are that passive income online start to taper off? That's a
Right.
huge question this generation is probably going to face. Is how many people can actually truly be a I don't know what it's technically called. That's my issue is like a third party seller for Amazon, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, how much drop shipping can there really be? But
yeah,
yeah,
when does
yeah, it's
that
interesting.
cap? And all of a sudden, the infrastructure, like, we know that infrastructure jobs are huge, like plumbers, electricians. These jobs are dropping like flies. Nobody's going to them, and we see that Gen Z did not go towards these jobs.
Hmm.
We and we don't know if Gen Alpha will. It's too early to tell. But those are huge things that our economy, our infrastructure, these things need. And what's going to happen when those jobs are paying less than your computer that is just mining Bitcoin, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah,
Like,
100%.
mine for Bitcoin and sit in Bali, or crawl under someone's deck and fix their leaking plumbing. I can tell you which one most people are picking.
Yeah, 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 all day. I think the one thing we didn't quite touch on yet. You said mental health, which is I know we've kind of talked about this a couple of times. I think literacy, like you said, that when it comes to mental health is at an all-time high, which is cool. Which is cool. That story of that student is pretty neat. I think, I think that sometimes Gen Z, even millennials, like get a bad rap at like everyone being triggered by everything, all those boomer things that people say. And I think that I understand where those come from in some cases, because I think that like resiliency is also something that has been majorly affected. But we know that from Dr. Deb Gilboa's research. She says that resiliency is a muscle. It's something that we can build and we can grow. The last thing that I think is important is that this statistically will be the most diverse generation yet across in the world, and especially in North America. We're going to see it as they grow. And I think what that also means is that we're going to have the highest expectation when it comes to diversity within organizations and at camps. Their understanding and their literacy when it comes to gender will also be extremely advanced, and I think that it's important that we know that more kids and more of Gen Z are somewhere identifying as LGBTQ plus in some fashion more than other generations. And I think that the way that I think Oliver, I think I can speak for both of us that in our generation we were at the tail end. Racism is still a big issue. Before I say this, racism is a terrible scourge that is happening, and it is not a fixed issue, but it is certainly, we have a different view on race than maybe the boomer generation really had to grapple with it. And I feel like we're in that same grappling with gender right now, that people still find it strange and all those terrible things that people say about it. And I think that Gen Alpha is going to view gender in the same way that we view race. Sorry, this is a very my white perspective here, but you know what I mean. We see race as something that where diversity is really important to us. It's essential when it comes to that, and celebrating diversity is extremely important. I think that there's some positive things coming when it comes to how we're viewing gender as a society as well, and that means that our organizations need to be ready for that as well.
No, no doubt. Yeah, the diversity of our world, and I think touching about it a little bit earlier was that diversity is going to be so spread out, uh, and then also trying to find a cognizant agreement for everybody, right? Because you want to honor everyone's uniqueness. Um, and then how do you find the answer for serving all those different diversities and all those different cultures and everything, right? Because what serves one culture might not serve another, but you want to honor all these different cultures. And I think problem solving that, whether it's going to be us as millennials or Gen Z or even Gen Alpha as they approach that difficult turn, it's a huge question in our day and age. And I love having this conversation with older generations because, I come from an immigrant family, right? Obviously, coming to the United States, my family was Italian, came over pre World War II, and when they arrived in the United States, the goal was to eliminate the culture that they came from, right? Uh,
Right.
right. Either A, you went and lived in Little Italy and you got to be in Little Italy with all the other Italians, or you lived in Connecticut where my family was, and they eliminated the Italian culture. My grandmother couldn't speak Italian. They didn't teach her how to cook that many Italian foods. They made sure that she became integrated with the American society, right? That was the goal, right? Then it comes to my mom's generation. That's continued on through her, right? And then it came to my generation as a millennial. And I sit here with a lot, my mom sits there with a lot of regret that I don't have that culture. I don't have that diversity that my family was so proud of once upon a time. Like we talk about being Italian American, all these different things, and we've brought some of it back with some of the food that we cook, and I try to learn Italian on my own, but I don't have that grandfather figure to teach me the basics of what I need, and it's going to be very interesting as we move down those generational lines of you know the importance of someone's ancestry, the importance of someone's background, and the culture that comes with it, and how that's interpreted and how that's accepted into our world. Because if you think about it, right, once upon a time, it was about eliminating culture. And
Hmm.
now we're in a world where we want to bring that culture back. But the reason why it was eliminated in the first part was so that we could all get along, we could all be American.
Right.
And
Right.
now we want to rebirth these diversities, right? But how do we make sure that with all this rebirth of diversity that we're getting back into our country and honoring and respecting, that we still find a status quo of all being one together, right? Maybe it's not under the house of we're all American, right? But it's under some form of connection. How do we keep ourselves connected in that, right? And
Right.
that's a question Gen A is going to have to learn a little bit about. So
Well, I think that I know we want to move on from this too, but
yeah,
I think what is important is that more and more. we're seeing this already, but I think that a simple like saying an organization saying like diversity is our value, like putting diversity as a core value, I'm putting that in air quotes, as an organization, isn't going to, and then just not doing anything, like just doing a land acknowledgement and then doing nothing else to support like indigenous communities or indigenous stewardship, like that's not going to cut it anymore. It's already not cutting it, and I think what's going to be important and what is good, I think that topics like diversity and gender are and race and getting into the muddiness of those conversations and I hope that I didn't, but if I said something in the last segment that was considered offensive, what I know is that there are people who are willing to have that conversation and call out when someone says something problematic, and I think that again, this will maybe dovetail into our next topic a little bit here about how we just need to be good facilitators of those conversations and helping kids facilitate conversations like that sensitively and also having the patience to be called out when we say something that's not great or to push back on that. So I think that renewal of those or that those conversations are okay to have is I think is a good thing as long as we can just be patient with each other as we go forward too.
It's the same thing that's rocked history for all of time, right? We are doing with what our mental capacity and our social culture and our ability to enact, right? That's what our generation is trying to do in the best possible way, right? We can look back on history, whether it's 100 or 200 years ago, the people who did some seriously wrong things, right? Unforgivable things, we're still doing it in the best intentions, hopefully, for what they thought their world needed to serve. With that being said, sometimes those intentions still had racist and hateful and horrible like connotations to it,
Yeah.
right? So when it comes time for us to us to live and do what we need to do, I'm happy to know that at the very least we will trip on rocks along the way, but we are trying to create a world where diversity is honored, where we are one people working together for a better place, like to care for our planet, care for each other, to create the best we can. And sure, in 100 years, someone's going to look back at us and say, "Man, how are you not able to do this? Why were you so behind on the time?" Like we are
Right.
do like so person listening to this podcast in 100 years, we're doing what we can. All right, we're
Yeah.
doing what we can, and you can't. I don't feel as though that's always is incriminatable, and I know that's not a word, but I'll make it up right now.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that, or what I take away from that is that the value that we come back to, and this is why summer camp, why we believe, I think, in summer camp so much, and why it's such an important place for kids, as much as it is for boomers as it is for Gen Alpha, is that there often are themes, and you can go back to our cult episode, because the themes are very culty, like yeah, togetherness, working towards the common good, that you should help each other, some religious places, treat others the way you'd like to be treated. All of those kind of terms are good, um, on their face, that they're good things. Now, when there are things that interrupt that and there are intentions that interrupt that, but I think the powerful thing about summer camp is that we're all here to have a good experience and take care of each other for the most part.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about how, with the best intentions in mind, we can make camp an enriching experience for Generation Alpha. So I'll hit on mine really quickly. And mine, first off, is plan ahead of time, provide more reliable sources. Like I was talking about before, this generation, or Gen Alpha, and even Gen Z, right? Fun for them has been provided, entertainment has been provided. So how to play a game, to get out there and play it. These are new things for some people coming to camp, right? Kids haven't really played. And that's a really kind of scary thing as a camp director. And you can see it in our schedules. We are super, super over planning every detail. Like I
Totally.
told Matt before this podcast, like one of my jobs right now is just planning, putting together a schedule that literally is by the minute and every detail for how you set up, take down, what equipment you need, where that equipment is found. Like everything is covered because I know that my staff and the kids that we're serving need that detail to make it work, right? To make sure that camp is fun because they haven't learned to play. I so I think that's really important. So whether it when you go to display these games, act out a demonstration, show them how it's done, right? Have them be a part of it, make it entertaining, use media, right? Uh, Somebody brought up this great idea to me today that is, we have these kids who are going to be coming to camp, and we know we want to front load before coming to camp. We don't want to have to explain the rules constantly. So what if we're like, if we shoot a TikTok video explaining the rules to knockout, right? So before a kid comes to camp, they know the rule of knockout and they can just start playing. And maybe they help another kid that maybe didn't watch the video, right? And then everyone knows how to play knockout before coming to camp. Now you're saving yourself this like really kind of awkward, like, oh, you don't know how to play knockout? Or you have 20 kids who have never played knockout before and they're 12 or 14 years old, right? Which is such a simple game. Like most my generation was playing knockout by like 5. And if I'm saying knockout right now and you're not thinking about the same thing I am, or you're trying to wonder what it is, or you're Google searching it, that's okay. Uh, so using that media, trying to front load them before, and that's my next point was front load those activities. So what can you send out to kids beforehand to make them comfortable about coming to camp, right? The other thing is we talked about this COVID, this strong family unit. They're now coming to a place that they feel unsafe. So by front loading, contacting them ahead of time, send them information about what camp is, making stuff on social media that's accessible to them that they can scroll through, not just 1 or 2 videos on like, maybe something that's happening at camp or anything, but fun, interactive stuff that kids can scroll through and go, oh, this is what happens at camp. This is what I'm getting into. Oh, this is what I'm going to get to do when I go there. It allows their brain to start going, placing them in those videos, placing them in those events, getting to do those activities, and even maybe thinking about themselves, like helping create those videos, right? Being a part of those videos. So that's a really important thing. The next thing I'm going to say is I talked about scheduling, but I think camp's pace is getting murky, right? I think it's a combination of slow moving and fast moving when it comes to your scheduling, right? Some people might tell you, like, make your schedule so that it's really quick, short periods, like 20 minutes at a time. Kids go to play basketball. All right, cool. They're only going to be entertained for 20 minutes at basketball. All right, let's move them to like cooking. Sweet. We're going to make this really quick marshmallow over the fire. Cool. Marshmallow's done. All right, let's get into soccer. We're going to play soccer for 20 minutes. And they're making their schedules quicker and faster. A lot of camps still are working off like an hour schedule. That, to my knowledge, not a lot of people are changing to those things. But within that hour, what's happening to a lot of kids and a lot of counselors now is they get there to basketball. And all it says on the schedule is basketball. And then the kids play basketball for 5 minutes if you can get them to play in the first place. And then you have another 50 minutes of kids just bored sitting on the basketball court, right? Especially with, those like 12, 13, 14-year-olds sometimes. You might get 1 or 2 kids that want to play and then others that sit on the side. So this is my advice to you, right, as you move into these activities, is you have 1 hour for basketball or something that's a little bit simpler like this, right? Don't do just 1 hour basketball. Do 1 hour of 5 basketball challenges, right? First challenge, try to hit a basket without looking, right? Shoot it over your head, right? And the next challenge is playing a game of horse, right? The next challenge is knockout, right? We have all these different games that we play and we move from one to the next. So there's always something new and entertaining for the kids. So with those shorter attention spans, you can keep them invested because you just do, all right, we played that game, let's play this game. All right, now let's play this game. And here's the thing, it's the same thing that we've always done when it came to like soccer practice, right? You start off with warm-ups and you do dribbles, then you do a drill, and then you end with your 3-on-3 basketball, your 3-on-3 soccer. So it's the same thing that we've always done, but now we have to plot it. We can't just show up to basketball. We need to intentionally know what we're doing before we do it. And I think that's really important. Also, Matt is telling me that he doesn't know what knockout is, and I've just said it about 20 times. So I will add it into my Eggle and explain a little bit about how knockout works. But but Matt, is there anything that you're thinking about for making camp an enriching experience for Gen A that you want to make sure everyone knows or can do before we start this summer?
For sure. I There's three kind of things I want to hit on, and I think my first one, as I went up on my soapbox and talked about AI earlier, I think the answer is that we need to role model and help kids through relationship developing, and not being a therapist, but being a coach to help them process their emotions and their feelings, because they if they have big feelings and they from that TikTok has taught them all these things about their feelings that that I'm having a panic attack or I'm having anxiety or this person hates me. Some of those big feelings that are they're feeling them. We want to be able to respond kindly to that so that the answer for them isn't to leave the camp experience. I saw a lot of kids want to or go home this past summer that I really wish didn't. But it was clear to me that being at camp was so detrimental to them and the other people in their cabin that it was just the right fit for them. And our staff just we didn't have the skills to be able to help those kids, and I wish we did. So those are skills that I think we should double down on as counselors and frontline staff. Um, I think also when it comes to the programming, Oliver, I like what you're talking about, of trying to teach them beforehand, and just being aware that our teaching tactics or the things that we might have relied on as facilitators. I can recall doing team building activities where I had to stand in one place for a long time because that was going to help the group succeed. I don't think that those are going to work as well anymore unless we really like scaffold the experience up to that. We can't just throw them in the deep end of a conflict like a team building thing can happen because they're not going to be ready for it until we help them get there. Or some will be ready for it, but I think the ones that aren't ready for it, again, we're going to push them into that red zone a little bit too fast, and it's just not going to be helpful. um, I think giving them ways to kind of customize their camp experience, and being clear about what the guardrails are, so we tell them kind of what the limits of that creativity can be. But I think giving them some free choice will help them, and then making sure again we have so like for instance we a while ago we ran a free choice afternoon where kids could just go wherever they wanted at camp. Again, we gave them boundaries. We said you have to be with a buddy the whole time. You have to check in halfway through. We're going to do like a cabin roll call, have snack and do cabin roll call halfway through. And if you don't know where to go to the dining hall and we'll have board games and a chill space in there. So we set up those guardrails for them so that we weren't leaving to chance a kid being like, oh, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do something that I shouldn't. We gave them lots of positive choices there. And then I think especially just being very sensitive to the fact that they won't have their phones or technology or AI or those kinds of things. Again, just being really patient with that. I think no matter what your camp's policies are on staff and volunteers having their technology, I think being really aware that that's going to be hard to see someone, even if you're just using it for like music or something fun to amp up your program, be just really sensitive of that. And I think that again, that it comes down to role modeling, that it's okay to be like, a little bit bored, or it's okay to not know the answer to things and to ask them questions instead of coming up with answers and really getting them to think. My favorite thing to do with my nephew, who is certainly a Gen Alpha, he's 6 years old, is that when he asks me a question, I just ask it right back to him and I say, "What do you think?" Or why, or I ask him just questions all the time, like, why is there ice flowing down this river right now? Where did that ice come from? And I don't know the answer, and I don't really care what the answer is. I just want to hear his little brain think about it, because that's fun, and I think it challenges him to do something that he might not do on his own volition. So I think be sensitive, give them chances to customize, give them guardrails, and just help them build those relationships and work through their feelings, and just be patient as they do that.
All great points. I love the idea of that guardrail. I think I might try to enact that. Take some strong counseling. So hats off to your staff for making sure that that open play was still well facilitated. At least I
Yeah.
hope so. You might have a horror story.
No, no, it went really
Uh,
well, really well.
perfect. Well, that is our show for today. I really loved talking about this one. I think even Matt and I were like, our brains were spinning the whole time with things to think of, right? That might be coming up or you might have to handle. I would love if somebody is super interested in this and wants to talk more Gen Alpha. I would love to talk to you about it. And you can probably reach out to Matt and I in the show notes, find our contact information. Um, And then that way we can talk more Gen Alpha, especially like ways to work with it, because I know that was a shorter piece, but we're brainstorming on those things as well. So I think we would love to continue that conversation with any of you. But our show doesn't just end because we finished there. We also have this wonderful little spot that we previewed for you, but it's called Eggle. It's ever growing, ever learning. It's a trick, a tip, a game, or a song for counselors to use to be better every day. And this isn't just us doing it for fun now. It's so great that people wanted to tell us, hey, keep doing that. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about that sponsorship.
Yeah, we are grateful that this season of First Class Counselors and the Eagles this year are sponsored by Ultimate Camp Resource. Ultimate Camp Resource is a directory of over 1,000 free descriptions of games, skits, songs, and other activities to make your summer great. If you're interested in checking them out, you can visit the show notes, and we'll have the link to Ultimate Camp Resource there. And they also have a camp store if you want to get some cool camp stickers or clothes. You can check it out at itsacampthing.com. Again, the link will be in our show notes. Okay, Oliver, you are up to deliver the ultimate camp resource for this episode.
I am, and I found a cool story. They have campfire stories in there, and they divide them up by different categories. There's scary stories, moral stories, funny stories. So you can find the one that might be right for you in your cabin this summer. The one that I found was called "The King of the Sharks." I'm not going to spoil any details, but I think it is a great story that you can read to your campers. The stories are all written out. You can take them out. You can adjust them as you see fit as well, to kind of hit those notes that you want. So, maybe it's not a story about a mother and son, but it's about a family. But you can take a little bit of your own to do that. I would also suggest these are just the stories really typed out. Some of them have Native American history to them. Some of them may have like European history to them. I encourage you, once you find that story, to do the research and where that story comes from as well,
Yep,
because
for sure.
it's a little bit cooler to use that detail. On a side note, there's also stories that really, they're like maybe American folklore, which we have a lot more access to change up as you want. So while the story might take place in Virginia, where your camp is located in Rhode Island, you might change it just so that it's a Rhode Island location to work for you. So the story that I really enjoyed was The King of the Sharks. I read through a couple of them, but this was, I think, one of my favorites. And it is kind of a good story to tell you why fishermen don't tell other fishermen where they fish. So that's my little precursor for you before we go do it. And Matt said he didn't know what knockout was, so I'll put a little extra eggle in there for you.
Please.
But I know this is just a translation issue between Canadian and American.
Oh,
But
okay, okay.
knockout is a basketball game. You have two basketballs, and you line up on the free throw line, and then there's a line behind you of everybody
Yep,
else. The
yep.
first person shoots the basketball. If they hit the basket, they get to then give the ball to the next person in line, and then the new first person in line gets to shoot as soon as the first shooter shoots. Wow, I'm starting to ruin how to describe this game. Uh, but essentially, is if the first person shoots the basketball, fails to hit that basketball, hit that shot, then the next person can shoot, right? Now there are two basketballs shooting at the basket at a time. If the first shooter gets their basketball into the hoop before the second shooter, they are safe, and they just bring the basketball to the next person in line who's waiting to shoot. However, this is why it's called knockout. If the second shooter hits the basketball after the first shooter fails, right? They get in there, they get it in. Then the first shooter is out of the game. They go and stand off to the side. They cheer everybody on for the rest of the game until there is only one person left. The pace is a little bit slow, and it starts to pick up as the game goes on. It's important to note you don't have to wait turns really on shooting. The first person shoots. If they miss their shot, it is a free for all shooting there between the two shooters.
Right.
So it's not like one person shoots and you got to wait for the next. The other thing is, if it gets a little nasty in some of these games, sometimes some camps, not all camps, but they allow you to get a little nasty. And sometimes people will like hit somebody else's ball away, and they got to run and go and grab it. And, or someone might hold the ball a little bit longer to give someone a shot. This game is one of my favorites, though, and I'll do it during staff training to teach my staff that the best counselors come in second place. Because the cool thing about this game is if you have that kid and a counselor who make it to the last two. It's really intense, but if you're a good counselor, you can flip it in just the right way to make sure that that kid wins, and that's a huge deal to that kid to beat
Yeah.
that counselor. So it's a great, great, great one to teach. That warm fuzziness of coming in second place and the kid having that huge moment of triumph and having a magical moment over their counselor, which is great. So that's knockout. So you got two from me today. Thank you, Ultimate Camp Resource, and thank you, Matt, for adding that little extra one in there for today. What do you guys call it in Canada?
Bump. The game is
Boom.
called bump because when you hit the ball away, you bump the ball away. You bump one ball off the other and you bump it away.
Oh, so in Canada, that's a rule. You guys can bump someone else's ball anytime you
I
want.
I can't speak for all of Canada. I can speak to Westvale Public Elementary School where I think I learned to play it the first time and they called
I
it
just
bump.
I
But
just want to
I'm
say
pretty
that
sure people call it bump around here. I don't know. I don't know. Tell us in
I
the
just want to
comments.
say that Canadians typically get a. You guys are super nice and kind, and now I learned that in one of my favorite games, you guys just arbitrarily allow the bumping. I mean, I don't know.
You can be nice and you can play to win at the same time. We're just very gracious winners. That's all. Okay, my eggle for this episode, for those of you tuning in on YouTube, it's something I have on my desk. It is a warm fuzzy jar or a memento jar. A lot of camps do this, so I'm sure you have something similar. But we did this at the end of staff training where everyone got a jar. You put your name on a label and you got like glass markers to decorate your jar. And then everyone took some time throughout the last day of camp and just wrote nice notes to each other. So I have some of those nice notes in here, but I also have some like trinkets and like shrink art and just different things that people gave me over my time at my last camp that mean a lot to me. So, sometimes I'll start my day when I sit down at my desk, I'll pull one of these out, read them, and have a think on, one of those positive moments. And I think it's a nice little grounding exercise that you can do as a counselor. That's why some people kind of put stuff up in their bunk sometimes, or even in the off season, you can have one of these to kind of keep your camp batteries full. So I highly recommend a warm fuzzy jar. And if your camp doesn't do that, then this is something you can totally do as a counselor on your own. Maybe in the staff lounge, you can make take yogurt containers, like I don't know, big, like I don't know, American, like 1 liter, 1 gallon yogurt. I don't know,
Yeah, you're
but you
fine.
know
I
what I
got it.
mean. A little container, and you could get everyone's name on them and like string them up or put them somewhere, little like mailboxes, and they're only used for warm fuzzies, not cold and pricklies. So a nice little thing for
I was
people.
waiting for you to say that cold prickly. They go in tandem.
Yeah.
What's a warm fuzzy without a cold prickly, who eventually becomes a warm fuzzy? I just think about like the warm fuzzy touches the cold prickly, and then the cold prickly becomes a warm fuzzy because kindness
Mm,
spreads.
I like it.
Good.
I like it.
All right. It was a long episode, but it was a good one, you guys. And if you enjoyed it, please, we'd be so grateful you left us a review wherever you were listening to the podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only tell us what you like or don't like about the show, where to go, but also helps boost our rankings so that more people can discover those amazing things. And therefore, we make more first class counselors out there.
And also, don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/FCC. There's lots of great stuff out there from the other podcasts, and you'll find the show notes where we will share some of our research for this episode and the eggles and all that good stuff. So check that out at gocamp.pro/FCC.
Thanks for listening, friends. And remember, camp is camp, and camp's all good.